It is 2024, season 3 of A Conversation with Brian, and I am so honored that you all have stuck in there with us and hung in there with us and supported this journey of hoping that we spread the word of so many educators and other people who are just doing great things out there in the world. And we have a lot of people doing a lot of great things. We just need to tell their stories. Tonight's guest, our first of 2024, is Chris Burton, a dynamic figure with a Doctor of Ministry degree. And he plays now the role as director of the Leadership Institute at Union Presbyterian Seminary. Chris is the force behind the Baddest Consulting, an anti-racism agency, and a recognized innovator in ministry. Chris, known as the Baddest Chaplain, brings his transformative message to social media and podcasts. As a Lupus Foundation ambassador, Chris shares insights on justice and courage, drawing from his personal journey. So get ready for an engaging conversation with Chris Burton, a catalyst for change in our community, and just an all-around good guy. So without further ado, let's welcome to A Conversation with Brian, Chris Burton. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. That was really cool. I like this intro. This is awesome, man.
Gotta do it up for you. Hey, again, welcome to the show, and Happy New Year's 2024.
Hey, same to you. 2024. It's gonna be a year of magnitude, man.
Yeah, huge year. This is my third season, and as I said, I'm really fortunate. I've had a lot of great guests, and you starting off the year, I really am honored that you've joined us on the show. What I do is, at the beginning of each show, I ask my guests to talk a little bit about their personal story, their professional journey, just so my audience gets to know my guests. So who is Chris Burton?
Yeah, there's over the years probably a lot of answers to that question.
Yeah.
It's funny you asked me this because it was probably not until about 2022 going into 2023 that I really started to think of myself primarily as an artist. And I say that because I think about how creation, and part of this is sort of like a theological understanding of it, but I really understand creation and creating as something that never stops, right? So if you ask a poet or a painter, and you could be in the museum, you could be reading the book and you're admiring it, they generally kind of see like, oh, I could have done this. Like, like I'm seeing like a beautiful like drawing behind you. If you ask the person who drew it, they're like, oh, I should have used like another shade of blue or like whatever is in their head. And I think of it as, it allows me to really appreciate the journey far more than just the destination, because we have so many destinations in life. So if I were to just tell you, oh, I do this, yeah, that was true in 2010, but in 2015, I was doing something else. And in 2020, doing something else. In 2025, I may be doing something entirely different. But what's stayed true throughout all of it is this understanding of myself as an artist, as a creator. And I think that understanding kind of flows through everything I get a chance to do.
Would you say that, and just reminds me when you say that, is like, I was talking to somebody recently, and somebody said, Brian, you're a little bit different from when you were, 10 years ago. And I said, yeah, I'm constantly evolving. Once if I learn something or I have a new experience, it might change my perspective. It might give me a little bit more wisdom, or a little bit more being humble because I thought I knew something that I didn't know. So you're constantly evolving. Like you said, there's no there's no end really. It's like this it's kind of like the journey, as you said. You want to embrace the journey.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And I think otherwise you get so stuck in whatever thing you accomplished, right?
Sure.
Like think about it, you were an athlete, a great athlete. If you just
take the great out, but I was an athlete.
Listen, if we I'm gonna say great because there's a lot of folks who have hoop dreams who didn't get a chance to do a slice of what you did, you know what I mean? So we're gonna say great. But even with that, like I appreciate the humility in that. But in the sense of, you're not someone who's defining yourself by what you did.
Yeah.
You're defining yourself by what you're doing and what you hope to do. And I think
Sure.
it's just something that goes across all sorts of industries, all sorts of walks of life. I don't want to sit, I would never just want to be on this podcast only talking about what I did in 11th grade. I felt like I was the man in 11th grade, but
Yeah.
I've done some more things, you know what I mean?
Well, we have plenty of people who just kind of live in the past and
yeah.
stuck, and you're right. And so you always want to hopefully evolve and not rest on your laurels, right?
Right.
You know, your educational journey includes degrees from Davidson,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Yep.
Union Presbyterian Seminary
Mm-hmm.
and St. John's.
Yeah.
Oh, so how has your diverse educational background shaped your approach to your ministry
Yeah.
and your anti-racism consulting?
Oh, certainly. I think about being, you know, I was 16 when I was graduating high school. So I remember
You're a youngster.
young, and it didn't
Wow.
feel young, but now I'm like, man, 16 is young, you know, like it's kind of that mindset of I wanted to go far away from home. Like I grew up in New York, I lived in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So to me, going to school in North Carolina at Davidson, I was like, this is like far away enough from home. I didn't want to like, you know, go to the West Coast or out of the country, but I wanted to make sure that I could kind of do things on my own. And I remember just not really knowing how to like process that sense of culture shock
Sure.
with being outside of New York, because you don't realize as a New Yorker necessarily, especially as a 16-year-old, you don't necessarily realize how different the rest of the world is.
Yeah.
You know, so I
And
think
different the
about
rest of the country
a
is.
different the rest of the country is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's kind of like this subway map that's just like burned into my head that I kind of just use for life. Like all the
Sure.
lessons that I learned from the subway that don't necessarily translate to other parts of the country. So I say that, and then going from you know, a liberal arts school in North Carolina to a seminary in Richmond. And I remember going into my or in my senior year when I was talking to my roommate, one of my best friends, a godparent for one of my kids, and he's from South Carolina, he's from Charleston, and I was
Right.
saying to him, "Yeah, I'm gonna go. I got the scholarship. I'm going to the seminary in Richmond." He's like, "Man, Richmond is different." And I was like, "Bro, we just did 4 years in the South. Like, I understand it. I got you. Blah blah
Yeah.
blah." But he was right. Being in
Sure.
Richmond was another learning curve for me, and so it just was continuously understanding, like, oh, this stuff is going to be different. And then taking that now, after I finished my Master of Divinity, I was going straight into a Master of Ed program as a New York City teaching fellow at St. John's. And there was a sense of, first, the sort of sticker excitement of like St. John's, like, you know,
Yeah.
basketball head. So, oh,
Yeah.
St. John's, this is going to
Yeah.
be fun. But it's a completely different learning style, teaching style at St. John's
Yeah.
compared to my Union, my seminary, or even Davidson for undergrad. So how it translates to ministry is it's allowed me to hyper focus on the value of hospitality. I think that allowing something that has stayed with me is when you read, you know, God's message to the people of Israel delivered through Moses.
Mhm.
There's this recurring theme of emphasizing kindness to the stranger, kindness to the
Sure.
widow, kindness to the orphan, because you were once a stranger in Egypt,
Yeah.
right? And so, and then Jesus obviously tells a story about like the Good Samaritan, and
Mhm.
there's this understanding of you need to help folks out. And
Yeah.
I think if I hadn't had the experience, so let's say I stayed, you know, in Brooklyn, went to you know, Brooklyn College or something,
Mhm.
and just like, you know, never really left the environment that was familiar to me,
Right.
I wouldn't have the same level of empathy for someone who is new to town, or someone who, you know, doesn't know their way, how to get from the 4 to the 2 train. Like
So
someone was,
you were a stranger
I
when you
was a
could be different
stranger.
places. Yeah.
Precisely. So it's allowed me to take that as a core principle of my ministry, and just how I try to move through the world is with this embedded default setting of hospitality.
Yeah. Did you always have this spirit of giving, and where did that come from?
I think I saw my family as very generous people. You know,
Mhm.
like I grew up with you know, a lot of cousins around, my aunts and uncles,
Sure.
and just this sense of, you know, you help folks out, and it wasn't just, you know, sort of like the insular we help each other out only. I saw, you know, I have an aunt who volunteers and helps people who are experiencing like domestic violence or
Sure.
currently experiencing houselessness and homelessness. I have aunts who are teachers. My mom worked at Head Start. My grandmother babysit everybody, it feels like.
It
And
was
so
all
I
around you.
just all around me, just all
Right.
these different lessons. And I think it's even translated into how I think about myself now as a father, this whole sense of it's not just what I'm going to tell my boys as much as like what I show them.
Yeah.
And like and how I live is going to tell them a lot more than like me being like, don't do this or don't do that. Like it's how you live that really teaches that lesson. So I think I learned a lot about giving just from the adults in my life, and the way that service was just a value that was instilled in me.
Yeah. Where'd the baddest chaplain come from?
Oh,
I
I love this.
love that. That's like so unique.
I remember when I had taken a year off of seminary, and so I moved back home, back home, and was living with my grandmother for a year, and just trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
So I, it was the first time, and that's why I loved your first question about who am I, because it was the first time that I couldn't have answered that question by saying, oh, I am student body president, or I'm a student at Davidson, or I'm attached to something that would make you go, oh, like wow, like I just
Sure.
was home and didn't necessarily even have a plan. And what I did have was a sense of, I know this isn't a permanent situation, so I just locked in. And a friend of mine had introduced me to this method of reading the Bible. I think it's started by a professor named Grant Horner, where I would read 10 chapters of the Bible every day. So every morning I would just get up and just like write. And at that point, Twitter was just starting, right? Like Twitter at this point was the wild, wild west. It was just anything happening. Nobody was there were no police on the street,
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to kind of, move the algorithm as best as I could, just like, probably like trying to sweep up the beach. But like, I had this sense of, what if I posted my Bible study notes on Twitter every morning? So like, as I'm reading scripture, I'll just post things there. And then working on that. Meanwhile, I knew that I wanted to go into teaching. I felt this inkling of that, and eventually received a calling to go teach as a chaplain at an Episcopal school in Charlotte.
Right.
And so, I come from a Jamaican heritage. I come from, a child of like dance hall culture.
Sure.
And so, within like Pathway, if you say something's like the baddest, it's like, this is the best thing going. This is like top ratings, like high praise is given to it. So when I started, I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be the baddest chaplain alive. Like, I'm not just gonna be like, oh, I'm just gonna do this a little bit. Like, I want to be the baddest chaplain, and from that this like, it just took off from there.
Well, it's a great hook, and not just a hook. It's just something that I believe, and I think you believe. Once you connect with somebody and you can make a connection, then you can go deeper.
Yeah.
Got to hook them, and then you got to get them in, and so they're probably like, that, like I'm asking, what is the baddest? And
right.
So you can go deeper. You mentioned something, and this is not in my notes, but you mentioned being student body president at Davidson.
Yeah.
Where did had you always had like, or did you have kind of political aspirations, or is it something that somebody said, I see something in you, Chris, this is something that I think you should do, or something that you just felt like it was important to do because you could help influence people in different ways, or all of the above?
A little bit of everything. From the time I was in third grade, I was involved in like student government stuff.
Okay.
I remember we had a great teacher at my elementary school, PS44. Her name is Miss Barton, and Miss Barton, and obviously my last name is Burton, so people like, is Miss Barton your mom? Like, no, A's there, U's there. It's like, so she was the teacher in charge of the student council, and I guess up until that point, the sort of like it was almost, and it's amazing. My school, just as an aside, they changed their name from like the Israel Putnam School to like the Marcus Garvey School, and it was a very like Black conscious school.
Right.
Amazing space. And we didn't just have, what you typically have, just like, oh, we're running for president, you're running for vice president. You ran almost like as a cabinet, right? So
Oh,
you would
really?
have these two parties within the school. I forget what they call, like the delegates of truth. They were like these really amazing names. And so I was a part of a cabinet that was all like third and fourth grade kids. So like little kids running against like fifth and incoming sixth graders.
Sure.
And we won. Like we had, I don't remember what we offered people, like street pizza on Friday. I don't know what we said, but we won. And I remember just getting that, like, I'm getting like goosebumps just thinking about it. I haven't thought about it in a while, but like we just had this sense of, man, we can affect things. And I remember we put on like a fair. So we took the playground. We had a giant like street party for the community. And from that, any level of school I was a part of, I always ran for student government. So I was student body president in high school and then student body president again in college. And it's just a sense of, I don't know, at some point, definitely I was like, I should be president of the United States as like a little kid. I'm sure I had that feeling, but I see politics as something that at its core is supposed to help make sure that our society is a place where everyone can thrive, that it doesn't have to be something where, you voted for me, so I'll make sure your street gets paved, and the people who didn't vote for me, they have potholes. It has to be something where we're taking care of everyone. And then tying my theology into it, I really have this beautiful dream about how society is supposed to function, where love is the system, where we're not just treating each other any old kind of way, but we're taking care of everybody. I don't think that's impossible.
It's interesting, as you talked about your experience as a elementary school student, and that student government, that form of student government, and the opportunities that you said all the kids got, that shaped you. That helped part of who you are, and so I always think about this thing when I wrote my book, and when I share with people this kind of this thinking of the opportunity gap. What if you and your classmates didn't have those opportunities?
Right.
How would that change your trajectory? And I think that's always something that I hammer home with people. It's like, this kid is not smarter than the next kid. This kid had an opportunity, or had more experiences, or had just the support that the other student didn't have. And so that's how they got to where they are. And so, and I'm not saying we should ever hold anybody back for, and I want people to achieve, but I also want us to always think about, this just society, and not saying everybody has to do the same thing, but just to me means that everybody has endless possibilities.
That's it. That is it. Absolutely.
When you started your consulting in racism advocacy in your consulting business, can you talk a little bit about, what your thinking was in terms of working with churches and private schools and others when starting that consulting business?
Sure. I think my first thought was, I didn't realize I'd been in this business for a long time, but I was just doing it for free. That was the first thing I thought about.
That's it. Yep.
I've been doing this for years. I didn't realize.
I think we all realize that. Like, we're doing a lot of, I think, and especially as educators, asked to do a lot of things outside of, our job or outside the 9 to 5. And we're doing a lot for free, and we're realizing, wow, this people get paid for this.
100%. So this is definitely a part of that, like other duties as assigned.
As assigned, yep.
But yeah, this desire. The first school where I ever taught, like I mentioned before, was an Episcopal school, so it was an independent school, and we had to, not just because of a contract, but a sense of the kind of educators that we are. We had to make sure that our kids could thrive there. And when I say our kids, I really meant all of the children there, because my whole philosophy on why to be anti-racist, why to emphasize inclusion and equity and diversity and belonging and all these other words like this, is because when you have this emphasis, it allows all kids to do well. I think when we continue to emphasize the current system of segregation and apartheid and just really oppressing people, those who are at the top of that society also suffer. Like, you know, there's so much fear that captures people. There's so much brokenness that captures people. And for me, I viewed it as an instrument of bringing folks together and showing that, you know, we can disabuse ourselves of myths of scarcity. We don't have to act as if there's only 2 cookies in the cookie jar. There's plenty of cookies in the cookie jar. Everybody can get something. So for me, it was really an understanding of how do I take this message and really not necessarily like, oh, I have to weave theology into it, but I saw how it lent itself to to a theological understanding. So bringing this to both churches, and I started out working with, you know, explicitly Christian schools, but I've evolved my stance to really just working with communities in general, because I'm not going into a community that, you know, may be non-religious. And I said, my goal is to make these people have the same beliefs as me. That's not the point, but I do want to show these instruments and tools that I have can be effective for them. So when I will talk about the story of Esther and the sort of courage that someone like Queen Esther has to, you know, speak truth to power. Like, she was speaking to the king who, if she said the wrong syllable to, that could be the last thing she ever says. Right. And that's something that translates across cultures, across social locations, the need for courage, the need to have the sort of boldness when you know you're doing the right thing. So it's really been that sort of mission. I've been able to put out a couple of ebooks to support it, and I've been working with churches and schools continuously since we started this work formally in 2020. But as I said before, when I started it, I just kind of looked back and said, my goodness, I've been in this business for 20 plus years and I didn't even know it, you know?
How do you keep the conversation civil when people sometimes get defensive, when we're always, and I know I know in my heart, and I think, you know, in your heart, we're always coming from a good place, but have different experiences and they sometimes get defensive. How do we help them and help people understand that we are coming from a place of love, and that we are wanting to move all people forward?
I try to, you know, obviously, like any good facilitator, you establish group norms, right? So you kind of establish you. So to me, it's unfair to people if you kind of just go into the work cold and say, okay, like, you know, what's the problem here, or whatever your approach is. If you don't say something as simple as, you know, we're going to speak from the I perspective, and then someone doesn't speak from the I perspective, and you're like dinging them on that, that's not fair to them. So you have to, I think it's just good practice to let people know, here's sort of like the established arena of what we can do. But even beyond that, I feel like every single, you know, community I've worked with, I've always had at least one person who was very vocal in their dissent from whatever the group goal was. And it's really taking the time to listen to the person. Unfortunately, there are times where you can tell, you know, I'm thinking about one instance where I worked with an organization where, as the gentleman was complaining to me, I was almost able to finish his sentences for him. Like, I could just hear the source of his material. So there are times where you're talking with a person and you can tell, in spite of your good intentions, in spite of your desire to have civility, folks have dug their heels in. And there's a real deep underlying fear in most of those cases, if not all of those cases. And so I just try to do my best, once again, to hold that space, to have the hospitality. I don't desire to just sort of shut people down or to block folks online. I don't desire to do any of that. I really want to make sure that people can, you know, articulate themselves in a respectful manner, and just have it be a common sense of we're not going to tolerate just like a blatant disrespect or like name calling, that kind of thing, but really just allowing it to be a space where people can process it. Because I'll tell you this, and this wasn't a part of my business, but it was a part of my work. I had a classmate who, when we started doing protests here at the seminary around 2014, it was around the time of Ferguson and when everything happened with the murder of Michael Brown. And I had a classmate who, you know, I never talked to him actively, but I would notice he would wear like a Confederate belt. Right. And I was just like, man, I'm not going to deal with him. You know, in my mind, I'm just like, a Klan member, I don't know. And so he wrote me a letter by the like I think by the time he was graduating or by the end of that semester, saying to me that he had thrown it away, that he was no longer wearing it because of the work that he saw me doing on campus and some of the talks I've given. And I just thought it was like such a powerful thing. And we ended up having a good rapport and a decent relationship. But to me, that's a testament of like, number one, you can't give up on anyone.
Yeah.
And number two, like you have to be persistent and consistent in your message, because if you come at it, and I think there's a lot of folks who are so convinced on how right they are that they forget that the truth has to be given in love. Yeah. So if they come at it from such a place where they're so convinced that they're right, that they don't care about how it hits you, you're gonna lose people.
Well, that becomes condescending too.
100%. Yes.
That happens, people are going to just turn you off.
Right.
The story you just told, that's really powerful. And one of the things that just hits me is that you weren't all over him. You just stayed consistent with your message, and he probably just witnessed you, and he was like,
right.
Oh, I know this is a good guy. I mean, I think a lot of things, start and end with relationships.
Of course.
Right? In positive relationships. And so you all had something in common.
Yeah, right.
Right. But somehow you changed him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is I just was amazed by it, and it meant a lot to me to do that too, because it gives you hope, because there's a part of it where you're doing whatever good work you're trying to do. There's always that sense of like hopelessness, that despair that kind of seduces you, to make you say like, oh man, just go home. Nobody's going to do this. But you have to stay at it. You have to stay at it.
Yeah. So somebody told me one time, and this is kind of just a random aside, when I started doing my podcast, and I started doing some other things, and I was posting online, and one of my buddies, he's prolific in terms of social media, and he posts a lot. He said, Brian, don't look at your likes.
Right.
Just be consistent.
Yeah.
Just post. Just post, because it's from your heart, or it's from your skills, your knowledge. Just post.
Yeah.
Because if you keep looking at your likes and you get 1 or 2 likes, you're going to get demoralized.
Oh, easily.
And so for us, if our why is to change humanity, I don't care how many likes I get, I'm going to keep doing what I do.
Right. That's it. So you're always amazed. Social media is tricky because you can often feel like you're just throwing it down the well.
Yeah. Right.
But it's making an impact for sure.
I'm going to change gears a little bit, and then we'll come back to some of your work. But one of the things that I really think is powerful, and has I think, and you probably don't realize how much you've influenced people, is your journey, your health journey with lupus.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about your journey with lupus and what you're doing now with the Lupus Foundation? But you've experienced something that most people have not experienced, and what you've taken through that, from what I understand, is this idea that pain and suffering doesn't have to be the end of it. It
right.
can be the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I was diagnosed with lupus 12 years ago. And, what always hits me is that it was at the beginning of so many things. Like, it was the beginning of my teaching career. I had been married 6 or 7 months before I got diagnosed. And it was just a point in life where, your possibilities, early 20s, so my possibilities felt like endless. I was like, I can do anything. And I think I sort of lived into that because I was all gas, no brakes. Like, I just kind of, all gas, no brakes. That's right. Yeah. So I just kind of lived my life as fully as I could.
Like 100 miles an hour.
100 miles per hour. And I did not appreciate things like slowing down. Like I sort of had like a overall culture, like New York culture, Jamaican culture, my family culture of, if you're laying down in the middle of the day, like, you must be sick, like something's wrong with you. Like, you're taking a nap? No, I'm not taking a nap. Like, it's so real that even in college, like on a Friday afternoon before like going out to parties, I remember just walking around like, where is everyone? I didn't know people were taking naps. I didn't know people were sort of just chilling before. I was always going. And so what it really did was, like, number one, just make me slow down. And I remember my older cousin, who was really a brother to me, he had told me, because I was the kind of person pre-lupus who would stay up all night and wake up early. You know, like I just
Yeah.
was up. Like I really didn't sleep that much. And then when I slept, it was like I went to hibernation mode. I was like completely out.
Yeah.
But it really was something where I just didn't slow down. And I see so much more clearly now that I take things in a much slower way. Like I still feel like I'm making an impact. As a matter of fact, I think I'm making more of an impact because I'm more deliberate
Sure.
rather than just trying to like touch everything
Yeah.
that's moving.
Yeah.
I'm now like really focused and feel more clear. But lupus is something where it really, you go through a deep sense of grief because you think about what you once were able to do. Like,
Yeah.
so for example, like I loved basketball. I was a coach for my middle school kids, and I would play with them as a teacher, like after school, and play often. And I was like, I can't do this if I want to have this any semblance of a quality of life. Like I have to really pare down the amount of times I play basketball. Just listening to my body, it's like my body is not enjoying full court games. Like it's not having a good time.
Yeah.
And just thinking about the ways in which you sort of have to redefine and re-understand how you're going to be. So I remember going through a lot of sense of grief and different episodes of loss. So I was like, will I be able to teach again? Like just the simple thing of being a teacher who walks around a classroom. Is that something I'm going to be able to do? Will I have the energy for it? Will I have the energy to, I was standing up and like just washing dishes and like dripping sweat, just trying to change a light bulb, dripping sweat. I was like, are there going to be things that I want to do just as a husband, as just as a man, and my understanding of that I won't be able to do just because of this disease that has no cure? So just thinking about how all of that led itself to this tremendous sense of grief for many years. And where it's ended up now is that now I have the privilege, as you mentioned, to serve as an ambassador for the Lupus Foundation. And as a part of that, I've run now like a support group, one that's actually starting in January, called the Lupus Warrior Well, where we're going to come together virtually and just really share our story, encourage each other, and just lift each other up, and just make sure that something that affects a lot of us when we first get diagnosed is the sense of, I'm by myself. This is the disease that I may have never heard of, or a disease that I only saw in like that Seinfeld episode where George Costanza thought he had lupus or whatever it is. There's so much misinformation out there, but this is a chance to share the information, to share the encouragement, and just continue to say we've got this. So I've participated in lupus walks over the year, been able to go to Capitol Hill and speak about lupus, and just really try to help educate folks. One of my favorite activities I do is annually with this foundation called You Got This Kid Foundation. I get a chance to speak to medical students, some of whom are going to become rheumatologists. Wow. So it's really this amazing opportunity. And I said this to other lupus warriors, that isn't it fascinating that this thing that feels like it's ending our lives and feels like it's like ruining our lives has allowed us to meet some of like the best people we've ever met, and some of the like best experiences we've ever had. And just this is like this deep, almost like fraternity that forms because of, oh man, you're on that medicine. I've been on that medicine before. Make sure you do this. Like you're able to take care of each other in a really powerful way.
I'm looking down because I sense every morning I try to read something inspirational. And try to reflect on how I can do better, because I'm constantly making mistakes. I'm constantly thinking, like, reflecting on what do I need to do to become a better person, which is it's always deep in my head. I don't share it a lot, but it's deep in my head. I share with a couple of my close friends, and this morning I shared something from Kareem. I subscribe to his newsletter. But one of my friends wrote back, because it was talking about this idea of losing together. And it's great to win, but it's also important. And the article was just talking about how this one person was a coach, and his team was not winning. And his players came to him and said, we're trying as hard as we can, but coach, if we lose together, then we can share the wealth. Like we can
Mm.
spread the stress and not have it all on
Right.
you. And so when you were just talking, it reminded me, it's not like you're losing. It's like my friend said this. He said, um, one of the sayings that one of my friends says is joy shared is doubled, misery shared is halved.
Yeah, that's
So
real.
I think
That's real.
when you're in something that's really deep and physically or psychologically or socially, and
Right.
it's really weighing on you, um, it's important. And I think that's what you do is with your lupus work, is to make sure nobody goes alone.
Right, right.
You know,
Absolutely. I love that. Because it's just such a isolating feeling. If this happens, there's some people who are diagnosed with this. They're young girls who are just starting puberty, so they're like 8 years old
yeah.
when this happens.
Wow.
I can't imagine how isolating it is to have that happen. And so for there to be a community, a diverse community, folks all
Sure.
over the country, who were able to talk about this and really hold each other together. It's really like a beautiful expression of community. Like it's just we're bonded by something that's truly on its face unfortunate, but it's allowed so many of us to have this lifetime of friendship and relationships based on this commonality that we share. So yeah, I really love that understanding of misery being halved because I've experienced that.
Yeah. Well, I take my hat off to you and all the people who are, you know, engaged in this, and I don't know if I should call it a fight or a an opportunity to um, share with the world your journey.
Oh yeah, I think it's equally both because it's
Yeah,
definitely a fight, but
yeah.
an opportunity to share for sure.
Chris, let's change gears again. You have a podcast, and
Yeah.
you are doing me a favor, a solid, because I came on your podcast. But talk about your podcast. You had one, Cross Streets, which you started.
Yeah.
That was your first podcast, and you
Mhm.
hosted another person. Talk about Cross Streets and how you really had these deep conversations. And I think I remember one of the conversations you were having with somebody in Brooklyn. I don't know if it was at a barbershop or somewhere, but you
Yeah, yeah,
interviewing somebody and you talk about race, culture, soul care, all the things
yeah,
that
yeah.
are embracing our world today. And you do such a great job of again allowing people to feel comfortable in that space of
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, no, Cross Street started with a dear friend of mine, Brittany Bongiorno. She runs a production company in Los Angeles called Kin Media. And Brittany and I, we became friends because we were attending the same church. And we had this desire to really, that first season, all of our guests were our neighbors in Brooklyn. Right. So
Okay.
she lived we both lived in central Brooklyn, but I lived in Bed-Stuy, which borders Crown Heights, which is the neighborhood I was born in, right? So uh, you have all these different stories. One of my friends from elementary school who was a college basketball player, cancer survivor, teacher, just all these brilliant things. A brother who migrated up from the South and is an artist, a painter, and
Sure.
owns like a art gallery. All these different stories just from our neighbors. And then that second season was when the quarantine was happening, and we were kind of in pre-production, and they were like, oh, we
Right.
can't make this happen at all.
Right.
But thankfully we were able to, because that first season was all like in-person interviews. Like we
Sure.
would lug our equipment across the borough, like we're in the barbershop with equipment.
Yeah.
My man, he's no longer with us, but my man John, the barber, he was cutting hair, so you can hear the
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the episode.
and it was just such a fun experience to do it in person. But the challenge was, can we create that same quality of conversation, virtually? Like, obviously the answer now that we're doing this now is yes.
Sure.
But at that point, we were like, we've only done podcasts in person. We don't know if we can do this
Yeah.
any other way. And it ended up being such a fun season where we talked to just a whole bunch of people. It felt that season number 2 felt like it wasn't ever going to end in the best way. Like we just feel like,
Sure.
what about this person? What about this person? Because we realized that with virtual, we can talk to as many people as we want because we're not lugging equipment all over the place. And at that point, she had moved to LA and I moved to Long Island, so we couldn't even meet physically anyhow. So
Sure.
that third season, we were able to say, we're going to talk to some really folks who are doing things nationally, because we tried in that second season still to kind of stay with New York and tri-state area, but third season we expanded, and it really just ended up being, as you mentioned earlier, like a conversation about race and soul care. And this is really this, if I can kind of like boil soul care down for people, it's really this understanding of the ways in which New Yorkers use "you good," right? Like to just be like, what's going on with you? Like, how are you? And just really trying to cut through the pleasantries, trying to cut through the like, oh, everything's great. I got my new job's doing great. Like, cut through all of that and just really get to,
are you okay?
Are you okay? And it really became a wonderful and therapeutic space that was also educational and allowed people who frankly hadn't interacted with Black people to get a good sense of how we're human beings also, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Which is important.
When I listened to a couple of the podcasts, it just made me think about how everybody has their story.
Oh, for sure.
And everybody's story is important, and everybody's story is their story. Is
no
their
doubt
truth.
about it. No doubt about it. Yeah.
Where do you go from here? With you have in your podcast now, you have interviewed a number of great guests. I've watched it. What do you view next steps for your podcast?
Yeah, and I love it. I would say the next steps for the podcast is to really make sure that we're consistently going after guests that are a part of the like sort of larger conversation online, like people who are making an impact. But also with me now living in Richmond, I have this sort of like dual focus of not wanting to give that foothold up and expand that foothold, but also make sure that I'm talking to my neighbors here and getting a good sense of what's going on here and the pulse of it. Since it seems, God's really parked the bus. Like I'm like, I keep looking, I see God just has it in P. It's still parked. So I'm like, okay, we're here for a little bit.
You're there for a little bit, right?
There for a little bit. So while we're here, we're gonna make the most of it in terms of really getting a chance to like talk to our neighbors and making an impact here. So I feel this sort of like dual vision of wanting to have these conversations on Baddest Chaplain that are about theology and culture. And I like that definition because it encompasses everything. There's nothing I can't talk about because I'm a theology.
All the above. Yeah.
Everything's up for grabs. So it really allows us to have some fantastic conversations. And I just feel blessed by the opportunities to chat with people, but also blessed by the fact that I'm, people will tell me, oh, I love that episode you did with so-and-so. And I'm like, oh, cool. It's making an impact on people. That's cool.
Yeah. We're going to get to your Knicks in a few seconds, but my last question to get to them is, you've started this idea of online of morning meds.
Yeah.
And it really kind of talks about how it's like a rest stop for people. And can you talk a little bit about, where that concept came from? I really think it's ingenious.
Thank you. Well, it really is about, like I talked about, the main lesson I got from Lupus was to slow down.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of us, because, of the age we're in, the first thing you do in the morning, you wake up, you grabbing your phone before you didn't brush your teeth yet. You didn't even wipe the crust out your eye. You just like squinting at it, kind of, you got your phone. And just thinking about if you're what they call doom scrolling, right? Like, if, especially like when it's like a political cycle or something going on in the world, you're just like, oh, what's next? I want to, once again, just be that pebble in the ocean, right? But that pebble creates waves that create other waves. I want to have an impact on the algorithm where I'm not just giving you things are terrible. I want to help affect the course of your day by just reminding you that you're loved, reminding you that there's a hope, and that, as a matter of fact, hope wasn't even made for good times, right? Hope isn't just about being an optimist. Hope is for terrible times. Like there's this great figure in church history named Julian of Norwich, who wrote a poem, and one of the refrains in the poem is "All will be well, and all will be well." She's writing during the bubonic plague. Like, things are
Wow.
terrible, you know what I mean? But this whole understanding of all will
Sure.
be well is just so amazing to me. So as best as I can, I'm trying to remind people that, number one, wickedness has an expiration date. So all the terrible things you see happening in the world, it can't go on forever. As big and bad as it makes itself seem,
Right.
it won't be the last thing that happens. So just trying to remind people of that, but also give people the fuel they need to get through the day. And I feel like there's so many people I encounter who really just need something for today.
Sure.
And as much as that sounds like just surviving, people really are just trying to survive. And my hope is that I can help people along that journey go from surviving to thriving.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think sometimes you just are helping people and hoping that people can just take one more step forward and one more step forward. And they take, after a while, they've taken 20 steps and they're out of that dark tunnel.
Right.
Don't realize that they're in, they don't realize how, if they, as you said, misery and it doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
And so if they can just keep moving forward, eventually they can see that light.
No doubt about it. Almost like when you're teaching the kid to ride their bike, and you're like, "Oh, I
Yes.
stopped pushing you a long time
Yep.
ago."
Yeah. They didn't realize it, but they're pedaling. So that's pretty cool. Hey, all right. So let's talk basketball real quick before we leave. Your Knicks
Yeah.
are actually not bad.
Actually not bad.
You
People
know,
don't understand how much of a championship that is.
so tell me a little bit about your experience growing up in New York. First of all, why are you a Knicks fan and not a Nets fan?
Yeah. So that one's really easy. Like, I became aware of basketball in 1992. So this is when, like, the Knicks have
Patrick Ewing, yeah.
and
And
there
Starks.
and John Starks, and I think at that point, like, Oakley was there, obviously, but
Oakley, yeah.
Xavier McDaniel might have been
Yep.
there. Like,
Yep.
it was a team that just seemed like we could do anything. And
Yeah.
except for some, like,
Except for beat Chicago.
There's some team in Chicago in the Midwest that, like, kept getting in the way of our plans. But I was just sharing this with my wife earlier. I was like, when Patrick Ewing was drafted, his, like, sort of player comp was Bill Russell. Like, everyone thought he was going to be the next Bill Russell, and he would have been if there weren't some kid from North Carolina who also was playing basketball.
Yeah. But there were some good days. I mean, there were some
yeah.
years, and I actually remember those years, and so there has been some lean times, but
certainly.
With Brunson, he's I wouldn't. So for me, I at first I said I was surprised, but everybody from what I talked to, from who I talked to, they say this is who he is. He's a good player.
Yeah. Now, and it seems like he wants. I think that's been the main trouble, is that New York is not the kind of place where you can say, all right, we're going to regroup and retool and let these draft picks develop. We've been in win now mode since 1973, and that's been the problem, right? So with Brunson, this is not one of those players who, like, feeling the pressure of the big lights and Broadway and just falling to it. He wants that kind of stage. He wants to show his talents on the biggest stage there is, and I think he's up for it. And I see Randall, who has had such a rocky relationship with the fans. He's playing his best basketball I've ever seen him play. It's
this year it seems like it seems like, again, you can tell, or I can tell from year to year or from space to space, it seems like he's enjoying it.
He's having fun, which I've never seen him. Even in his years where he's made, like, all NBA, he was not having fun. Like, he's having fun this year. I'm so happy for him.
And so a few years back, I guess about 10 or 11 years back, you all had a brief, like, spark. And I loved the Linsanity time. And I've just become such a fan of his. I he could be playing in the NBA, but he's not, for a number of reasons. But I think his story is a story that is just so inspirational.
Absolutely.
In the way he carries himself, even beyond, I think being kind of, not, I don't like to say blackballed, but he's just not had the opportunity to come back to the NBA after, a number of different, situations. But I think he has carried himself in a way where he's like, I'm gonna, take these lemons and make lemonade.
No doubt about it. He's a great ambassador for the game above all else. I think the way Jeremy Lin has inspired kids thinking about, like, all the Asian kids who didn't
Right.
feel like, basketball is something they could thrive in. That Jeremy Lin has really been that shining example for it. But I just really love his integrity and the way he's demonstrated that has been great to see.
Exactly. So are the Knicks going to want to make the playoffs? And two, are you predicting at least a first round win?
I am so far gone in my optimism for the Knicks. I'll put it this
Talked
way.
about hope, Chris.
Look, the league is wide open as far as I'm concerned. And I don't see any reason why the Knicks can't make it to the conference finals or more.
Well, good for you.
I really don't. I think that, especially with the add of OG Anunoby from Toronto, it was obviously sad to see RJ and
Barrett,
go.
Yeah.
But I think it was a win-win. They're killing it in Toronto.
Yeah.
OG Anunoby's doing a great job for us. And I don't think the front office is done because we have Evan Fournier's expiring contract on the books for like $18 million. You got to use that for something. Yeah. And so if they add like a DeJounte Murray or Malcolm Brogdon or someone, like just another bench piece, or like a bench / starter piece, I think we can knock off either Milwaukee or Philly. And then Boston's the only one that's given us a whole lot of trouble. But, they're depending a lot on Porzingis, who we know is not dependable long term.
So folks out there, this is the new Knicks GM.
I'm telling you, I've got a path for us, y'all. We're gonna do it.
Well, Chris, I truly am thankful that you came on and took some time today. Your grace, your humility, your compassion, your wisdom, and in my intro, I said that goodness that comes and just oozes from you is infectious. And so I do appreciate you coming on. At the end of all of my podcasts, I use this old African proverb, as I go, I am wearing you. And as I meet people, as I talk to people on my podcast, and I've known you, for a while, for full disclosure, Chris is married to my niece, my brother's daughter, Brianna. But just, knowing your story and how you live your life, I am wearing you, but so many people are wearing you because of the influence that you just kind of provide to all the people who come in contact with you. So thanks for coming on A Conversation with Brian, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Subscribe to A Conversation with Brian on my YouTube channel and Spotify.